Hello, everyone. For those who are watching on our other platforms, I apologize if there was we're having a little bit of technical difficulties in terms of the sound. If some things sound weird to you from where you are, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, um, just let us know. Let us know, and we'll try to fix it. But another other way. Anyway, welcome to our weekly forum on Israel, Africa, and Black America. I am your host, Joshua Washington, the executive director of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. Welcome to those who are on Instagram, those who are on Clubhouse. I'm already getting comments on YouTube saying that the sound is glitchy. So I think it's this platform we've been using. It's kind of getting a little bit or just today it's just been a little bit glitchy as we've been trying to set things up. That was the first comment. This one is very crucial, and I think is kind of gets to the heart of why we are where we are now. If you're on Instagram or Clubhouse, there shouldn't be any glitching on your end. If you're watching this on your other social media apps, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, it might be glitchy. I would have, if it's still glitchy to you now, if you have Instagram, you can follow us at IBSI Now and watch this live. If you have Clubhouse, you can same thing, IBSI Now. You can watch us live from there as well. We're on all of the social media platforms. So, but I'm going to get into this anyway because I know things are glitchy. It seems like it's this software that we're using. It's been fine, up until this point. And meaning for the past few months, it's been fine. And only today it's been a little bit glitchy. So I see this note here. No, yeah, it's not the input. No, it's the everything's the same as it's always been. So it has to be the restream app. If everyone's hearing the same glitchiness, then and we were hearing it from each other, then it has to be restream. So hopefully it'll sort itself out while we're going. But again, if it doesn't, you always look at this again on Instagram. You can listen to it on Clubhouse, and then we always post clips of this on our YouTube pages as well. But we are going to get into this. Okay. First thing I want to talk about. Well, first thing is just of course a couple of quick announcements. You can we talk about it every week. Become a legacy builder for IPSI. Go to ibsi.org, and you can be a legacy builder, which is a monthly giver to the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. Doing that will continue to enable us to do the work that we do, this crucial work of Black and Jewish and Africa and Israel solidarity, strengthening that relationship. We have our end of the year campaign, which starts tomorrow, which is Giving Tuesday. Our goal for the last stretch of this year is 36,000, and it kicks off tomorrow. So keep that in mind as you are going on our website to become a legacy builder. We really appreciate it. Also in January, our CEO and founder and myself will be in LA at the Wilshire Boulevard Temple, doing some music and speaking. I had a conversation with one of the cantors a few days ago just to talk about some of the music. It's going to be amazing. We're really looking forward to it. And we'll be working with the kids there as well. So it's going to be a great time all around. It's going to be a great weekend. If you're in the Southern California area, please come out and see us. We're going to have a great time. And that's it for now. Okay. So let's hop right into this. And I just pray that those who are watching on other platforms, it'll clear up for you soon. So there's been a lot happening. Obviously, we know we've been following what's going on in Israel. We always spend a few minutes talking about what's happening with the war and the fact that some of the Israeli and other foreign national hostages have been released. Which is that in itself is a good thing. The thing that's been very challenging is that they've been released in return, or they've been released for multiple Hamas terrorists. I think the ratio is 3 to 1. So three Palestinian terrorists for every one Israeli or foreign hostage. And that's been kind of a difficult thing right now, and we've been seeing different responses from our friends in Israel. One article that I shared from my page was that an Israeli woman gave an account of one of the Hamas terrorists who stabbed her in front of her children. She thankfully survived that, but now because of this swap, um, they are going to be neighbors again, right? So just kind of like imagine going through the trauma of being stabbed, and unfortunately in our work we know a lot of we have Israeli friends and who have been stabbed multiple times, right? They're going through the trauma of that, but now you're seeing your attacker be released from prison and put back in the very place they were in before they stabbed you the first time. So there's all this stuff that's going on. It is it's difficult. Still happy and relieved for some of the hostages that have been released, but also recognizing that this is not is an easy thing that's going on right now. So prayers are still with Israel. Our hearts are going out to the people of Israel, and just praying that there can be a solution, that can be a better solution found for releasing these hostages that don't involve also the releasing of murderers and rapists as well. So all that being said, the conversation that IPSI has been asked to have a little bit more than usual lately is the one around race, one around Black Americans in Israel, Black Americans and Jewish Americans, the whole thing. I mean, it's really kind of the stuff that IPSI, it's kind of the thing that founded, that kind of saw IPSI start in the first place, right? IPSI was founded by Dumisani Washington, by my father, who one of the things that in his years and years of research, and one of the things that he came upon was a copy of a newspaper of an organization that was founded in 1975 by Bayard Rustin, who was Martin Luther King's right-hand man. And the organization he founded was called BASIC, Black Americans to Support Israel Committee. And he founded this in November as a response to the United Nations Resolution 3379, which said Zionism is a form of racism. Bayard Rustin, and he was not the only one, but Bayard Rustin stood up. Not only did he make public statements against this and wrote op-eds in the New York Times against this, but he founded this organization, again, called BASIC, Black Americans to Support Israel Committee. And he got over 200 signatures on this, on the tenets of BASIC, some of which you might recognize the names: Count Basie, Louis Armstrong, Arthur Ashe, Rosa Parks, Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King Sr. Again, Martin Luther King Jr. had already been assassinated a few years prior in 1968. But this was the response from many civil rights stalwarts in the Black community because of that UN resolution. And not only was that the response, BASIC had 7 tenets, and some of them had to do with anti-Semitism, like Jew hatred. Some of them had to do with anti-Israel bias, and some of it had to do with the Arab coercion and bullying on the continent of Africa. One of the tenets dealt with Arab oil prices and how the hiking up of oil prices in the Arab world has had a disastrous effect on Africa and those in the diaspora. And it talks about how it even talks about how the Arab treatment of Africans, and particularly in terms of economics, has also hiked up gas prices, which has disproportionately affected poor and low income people in America, which especially at that time were mostly Black Americans. And so it was very comprehensive, and that was kind of like, that was the genesis of IPSI and what IPSI does. And if you want to know more about BASIC, we have a ton of literature on BASIC on our website, ibsi.org. You can check it out. Bayard Rustin and what not BASIC did, but the things and the things that Bayard Rustin said and wrote and spoke, very powerful things that we're going to touch on a few of those things today. Okay, so that's like the background of Ipsy, right? And a lot of people have been asking us at Ipsy, whether they post it, they comment it, they message it, or they ask us face to face. Some of you might even see some of those comments sometimes on Instagram, which is they say, why is the Black community so anti-Semitic? Why is the Black community so filled with Jew hatred? And our response has not changed since we've been first asked that question. The first thing that needs to be understood is that it's not the Black community, by and large, that is um, that is perpetuating Jew hatred, right? It's there's a concern that Ipsy has always. We have a little bit of technical difficulties here. I'm sorry, guys, in the Instagram app as well. There we go. Wow, that's it. That's a trip. Okay, here we go. So yes, if you guys see that announcement on there on the bottom of the screen, it says you can join our Instagram live. It's much clearer. Apologize for those technical difficulties. But it is something that we always address, we always call attention to, and we always point to as an issue. But we also at Ipsy, we always, and I said this last week, try to get to the root of where something is coming from as much as possible, right? One of the concerns we've been seeing a lot, and we've been saying for quite a few years now, is the institutionalized Jew hatred on college campuses being taught to students by professors, in the curriculum of these students, like the textbooks, the administration allowing this, and now we're even seeing it in curriculum in high school. And so when we talk about anti-Semitism in the Black community, we're looking at the fact that these Black students and white students and brown students are in these classrooms learning this stuff directly from their teachers. They're learning things in their critical ethnic studies curriculum in California, for instance, and now it's all over different parts of the U.S. They're learning things like white is bad, Black and brown is good, and Jews are white, Jews are the oppressors. Israel is a white country, Israel's an oppressor, and anything that the oppressed does to the oppressor is just resistance. So this, some of us were okay with this kind of thinking, but we're actually starting to see this type of thinking manifest itself in what we've seen in the events following October 7th. The people that are celebrating what Hamas did, people here in the U.S. who are celebrating what Hamas did on October 7th, they are practically applying that framework that they've been taught in schools, right? Those Black students, those white students, those brown students, they are just putting into practical application what they're being taught in schools, which is that any kind of violence, any kind of aggression that Black and brown people, that quote unquote institutionally oppressed people enact against white people is justified because that is considered resistance. There is really no way to get around that without actually dismantling that whole line of thinking altogether. So the first thing I want to show to you, I want to share with you this video by a partner of ours, Dr. Brandy Shufutinsky. And she talks about this a little bit more in depth. It's a short video. She's an educator herself. She has a PhD. She's a part of a couple of different organizations that actually combat this type of teaching that I'm sharing, about critical race theory, anti-racism, all those things. She's Jewish, she's Black, and she's coming from this perspective. And I really want you all to hear what she has to say. I really hope that it's starting to clear up now. If not, again, on Instagram, I want you guys to take a listen, please.
through ethnic studies, what we're seeing is the institutionalization of anti-Semitism, where there's this idea that Jews are white, therefore Jews are the oppressor, and these other people are brown, and therefore they're the oppressed. And there's this whole idea that we've seen, unfortunately, since October 7th, that anything an oppressed group of people does to a so-called oppressor group of people is legitimized and it's acceptable. Hi, my name is Dr. Brandy Shupatinsky. I am an education consultant with the Alliance for Constructive Ethnic Studies and also a member of the Coalition for Empowered Education. What's being proposed right now in the state of California is to require ethnic studies as an admissions requirement for the University of California system. So any student who wants to attend, for example, UCLA, regardless of where that student is from, actually, if the student can be located in Kansas, in order to apply for admissions to UCLA, that student.
Okay, I asked him to stop it because, as you guys can hear, we're still having this sound problem on my end, so I apologize. I'm gonna summarize her video. We're gonna share it. We already shared it on our pages, but we're gonna share it again. I'm gonna kind of truncate what Brandy's been saying for those who are not able to hear it on Instagram and Clubhouse here. And she's talking about she was going deeper into what I was talking about here, but she was talking about the crux of critical race theory is this whole dichotomy of white is good, white is bad, dark is good, and any aggression or violence is justified, right? She talks about this being applied to the events of October 7th. And this is why, in her view, in this video, in the organization that she's with, why she doesn't just come against the notion that, or she doesn't just respond with the notion that, Jews are not white. Her whole thing is to dismantle this whole ideology that really just kind of separates people based on the color of their skin and applies attributes to them. Now, I see the comments here and I appreciate it. So we have these technical things. So I'm getting comments saying that the video is clear to everyone else on the streaming. And then for those who are here on Instagram and Clubhouse, you're hearing what I'm hearing, which is just glitch, 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 glitch. So what I'm going to do, and I apologize in advance, what I'm going to do is we're going to play the video for those who are watching on the streaming platforms, on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever you are. And then for those on Clubhouse and Instagram, I apologize. It's just going to be glitchy for a moment. And then we'll go back to the rest of our program. So, Maria, go ahead and play that. I don't know if you can start it from where it left off or to play it from the top, but go ahead and play it and let's let them hear.
Through ethnic studies, what we're seeing is the institutionalization of anti-Semitism, where there's this idea that Jews are white, therefore Jews are the oppressor, and these other people are brown, and therefore they're the oppressed. And there's this whole idea that we've seen, unfortunately, since October 7th, that anything an oppressed group of people does to a so-called oppressor group of people is legitimized and it's acceptable. Hi, my name is Dr. Brandy Shupatinsky. I am an education consultant with the Alliance for Constructive Ethnic Studies and also a member of the Coalition for Empowered Education. What's being proposed right now in the state of California is to require ethnic studies as an admissions requirement for the University of California system. So any student who wants to attend, for example, UCLA, regardless of where that student is from, actually, if the student can be located in Kansas, in order to apply for admissions to UCLA, that student would have to take an ethnic studies course in their high school before they'd be eligible to apply for admissions into the UC system. right now, the faculty members, the UC faculty members, their committee that is proposing making the ethnic studies an admissions requirement to the UC system, right now they're kind of held in check with guardrails that were put in place with the California's high school graduation requirement for ethnic studies. They're put in place by guardrails that say, for instance, that certain ideas that are taught in the classroom can't be anti-Semitic, they can't discriminate, they can't display political biases. All of those things are guardrails put in place right now so that students aren't subjected to any type of discriminatory lessons or materials in the classroom. A way to kind of get around that has been proposed by the UC Ethnic Studies faculty group, which is the group that's behind making ethnic studies an admissions requirement. And many of those faculty members they've come out in support of a lot of very highly controversial ideas. So the UC Ethnic Studies Faculty Council issued a statement after the massacre in Israel by Hamas, the terrorist organization Hamas. They issued a statement in support of Hamas's actions, saying that the acts of terror were actually forms of resistance and that they stood alongside what Hamas and the Palestinians have done and are doing. So I was not surprised when I read the statement issued by the Ethnic Studies Faculty Council because they've been saying things along those lines for a long time. It was a little bit shocking that they felt very comfortable saying kind of the quiet part out loud for all to see and hear. But that's also beneficial because now we are very aware of exactly where they stand and why we have to stand against the proposals that they're making, like making their radical version of ethnic studies an admissions requirement. If applicants are required to take a critical or liberated ethnic studies course in order to apply to the UC schools, what that means is that the group of students that come into the UCs will be much more homogenous than we would hope. You're not going to get the viewpoint diversity and diversity of thought that you hope we would see across college campuses, because those are going to be students who have been trained to look at things through a very narrow ideological lens.
So for those who are, again, who everyone's saying on Facebook and everything that the audio's fine, and my voice is the one that's glitching for them, and then obviously for those who are on Instagram and Clubhouse, it's the opposite. My voice is nice and clear, and the video is glitching and glitching. So yeah, it seems to be something on the software's end. I'm hoping that can kind of get fixed. But in the meantime, if you come to if you're on Instagram or Clubhouse, you can watch it you can hear me clearly on there. If it's still kind of not as clear to you. Okay, but for those who could hear the video, could hear what Dr. Brandy was saying, which is, again, is another example of why it's so important to break down this whole system altogether. I wrote an article a few years ago, and it's been resurfacing now to highlight some of these things, called The Palestinian Appropriation of Black Pain. And in that article, it highlights an archive or a historian, someone who was responsible for documenting all of Dr. King's written and spoken, any recorded words that he said. And he was appointed by Coretta Scott King to do this, actually. And his name was Claiborne Carson. And he has these documents that he wrote that are in the Stanford archives. I double-checked the link from the article. I had to update it because it got moved in the Stanford archives to something else. So when you clicked on it, it said void, but now you can check out his document. He wrote an entire document called Blacks and Jews and the Civil Rights Movement. And he actually goes into detail about how the Arab-Israeli conflict became a civil rights issue in the United States, how that actually happened, what was going on in the civil rights movement of the Black community, what was going on in terms of the tension between different leaders and the different leadership in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, but not just within that one group, not just within SNCC, but within the Black community as a whole, the Black civil rights movement as a whole. you had these younger, more militant people, Black people in the civil rights community, younger kids coming up wanting to take more aggressive stance. They felt like Dr. King's method of nonviolence was too slow and wasn't really doing anything, and some very harsh criticisms for him, and the people who followed that method. And because of that, there began to be much tension. Not something that was uncommon in the Black community. There's always a very diverse variety of viewpoints, but this was beginning to become more and more intense. And so what was going on in SNCC was that there were a group of people who felt that the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee should take a more global approach and go from just dealing with issues locally and issues in the country. Like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee would organize sit-ins, for instance, where they would drive down to certain cities and certain states where Black people weren't allowed to sit and drink coffee with white people, or even especially places where it wasn't illegal for a Black person to sit down at a regular table in a restaurant, but it was just de facto segregation, right? It wasn't on the books, but culturally it was not okay. And they would go and they would just sit. And in those sit-ins, a lot of ugly things would happen. They'd be spat on. They would get hot coffee poured on them. People would beat them sometimes. They would drag them out of the restaurants. They would sick dogs on them. I mean, it was intense, and they would do these things to make a statement, right? This was the whole point of these things was to highlight that even though legally racism was written off the books or erased from the books, it was still very much a thing that was in the fabric of society at the time. And so that's the kind of work that they did, right? But there was this tension within the group to attack more global issues. And the argument for that was, well, there's suffering happening all over the world, and we should be able to, with our authority and with our voice, use it to speak to those things. And the argument against it was, we don't have the bandwidth and capacity to. We have so many problems here within our own communities that, we may not be able to give the actual attention that these other issues need. And so there was this pull happening, and around this time, what happened in the midst of that was the 1967 war, the Six-Day War in Israel. And following the events of the Six-Day War, Ipsy talks about this quite a bit, but before I get to the Dr. King part, I'm going to take you through kind of some of the events that led to the Dr. King part, right? So following the events of the 67 war in Israel, what you had was members of SNCC's internal committee calling for an investigation of the Six-Day War. Now, again, what I'm telling you is based on historian Claiborne Carson, right? This was a Black American historian and documentarian who was responsible for documenting Dr. King's work. Okay, he was not his job wasn't to advocate for Israel. He had no skin in the game when it came to Israel. His job was to document Dr. King's work and give you some context around those things, right? That was it. So this is what he says. And you can find this again in the article, The Palestinian Appropriation of Black Pain, which is on our Substack on Africa Israel Weekly, which you should absolutely subscribe to. And one of the things that he documents, that Claiborne Carson documents, is that a civil rights activist by the name of Ethel Miner volunteered to do the investigating of the Six-Day War following the events. And what Ethel Miner wound up doing was, and in his words, there was no position paper, there was no forum like this, there was no discussion on what's happening in the Middle East or anything. And what she did was, she came back and said, okay, here's what I found. Essentially, Israel is just it's a terrorist organization, or the country is just indiscriminately killing these Arabs, and they stole their land, they took their stuff, and the 67 war, it's just a war to kind of get their land back. And one of the things that Claiborne Carson notes from the beginning is that even though she volunteered to investigate this, that she was very biased. And in his view, what already what kind of compromised her from the beginning was that she had close friends from her college years and from her younger years who were Palestinian, and she was very close with the Nation of Islam. A lot of good friends within the Nation of Islam. Now, those things alone wouldn't, just inherently make you biased, because, you can have those relationships and still be able to look at something objectively and speak the truth. That's nothing to do with that, right? But he pointed out the fact that those two things, and then the fact that she volunteered, and then the fact that she came back with this narrative that Jews stole land in 1948, and they've been just raping and pillaging ever since. And not even just that in terms of Israel, but what happened was, after her report, there was a debate within SNCC, but really it just, people kind of took it forward. There was a newsletter that came out from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that says, it's called the Palestine Problem, Test Your Knowledge. And what it had was over 30 what they call documented facts, right? But 30 different talking points about Israel and just about Jewish people in general. It had graphics. Graphic they drew was of a white man and a black man with a noose around their neck, and the person holding the noose had a Star of David. It was a hand with a Star of David painted on the hand to symbolize that the Jew has the rest of the world by their necks, right? And different things. And some of these facts were lies about Israel stealing land, and some of these facts were about Jews controlling everything. And it was really, really just blatantly anti-Jewish, with no, not even any space at all for any kind of counter argument. And what happened with SNCC after that article was published was that they lost a lot of their Jewish support, because, I mean, we've said this time and again, the Civil Rights Movement, there were a lot of Jews that not just stood by Black Americans, but risked their lives, died beside them, were willing to get beat to death, and some of them did, burned to death, ostracized, all those different things. There were Jews that stood by Black Americans during the Civil Rights Movement in ways that no one else did. That's why Dr. King said that no other group has been more sympathetic to our cause than the Jew, right? So the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee had a lot of funding that came both from Black Americans, but a lot of the large donors were Jewish, who wound up pulling their funding because they're like, what in the world? This is like it's not even a 180. It's just like you just moved to something else, right? We went from combating racism in America to, you just hopped, 10,000 miles over there to the Middle East and said that Israel is the white oppressor. What in the world? Which unfortunately kind of strengthened the resolve of some of the leaders in SNCC to say, see, when we're speaking the truth, people get uncomfortable, but we have this shouldn't stop us from doing what we're doing. And so you had a split. And I keep emphasizing the split because I'm still responding to the question that people ask, which is, why do Black people hate Jews, basically? And it's never been the case. It's always been there's always been a split, right? And so this was happening now. Some of the leaders of SNCC stepped down. They were pushed out. Some of them were pretty radical themselves, but they were replaced with even more radical people. And so this was happening, right? SNCC was going down this course. They published this very, very blatantly, very concerningly anti-Jewish newsletter. And now you have, fast forward to what we tend to invoke quite a bit when we're talking about this. You have Dr. King, who's an honored guest at the 68th Annual Rabbinical Assembly. And across from him, he's being interviewed by a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Gendler. And Rabbi Gendler, they talk about a whole host of things. They talk about race relations. They talk about the local elections, the current presidential elections, all that stuff, right? And one of the things that the rabbi asked Dr. King is, the question he asked him is, what do you say, and I'm paraphrasing, it was a long question he asked, but he's asking him, what do you say to the radicals in the civil rights movement who say that, in their mind, who believe that color is all important in this world? So they see Jews as white Europeans, or Israelis as white Europeans. They see Arabs as colored Asians, right? Do you explain to them that Israel basically is a multicolored country with people from who've been scattered to different parts of the earth, or do you explain to them that they shouldn't make assumptions based on race? How do you do this? Which to me is kind of like the question that I feel like is still being asked right now, right? And one of the things Dr. King said was, well, he tackles the color thing. He says that there are some who are color consumed and they see kind of a mystique in being colored, and anything non-colored is condemned. He said we don't follow that course at the Southern Leadership Christian Conference. We don't follow that course. Then he talks about Israel as a country, that Israel is an oasis of brotherhood, is a shining example of what can be done in the Middle East, right? And he talks about peace for Israel means security, and that security must be a reality. And then he talks about what peace for the Arabs means, right? But the thing that, again, that just I think keeps proving itself more and more relevant in our time is that the first thing that Dr. King did in his response was dismantled the whole color thing in the first place. So Rabbi asked them, do you explain to them that there are black and brown Jews? Or what do you do? And the doctor said, no, there are people who are color consumed, and their ideology from the beginning is that white good, black and brown, white bad, color good. And they look at things through that narrow lens, and they make their assumptions, and their actions all reflect those things. And so we don't follow that course. That ideology is what is being institutionally taught to kids in school, high school, college. They're being taught to look at life through this very, very narrow political lens and then make their assumptions based on that. And it still seems that there are some of us who can't decipher whether or not we should dismantle the whole entire ideology in the first place, or use the ideology to try to get them to change their mind. And Dr. King spoke to this. This was already going on in the 60s. He said, no, we can't play that game. To say that Israel is diverse is true, and it's a great thing. But to say that as a response to the whole white is bad, dark is good, all you're doing is you're playing their game, and that doesn't actually solve the issue because they're still looking at things through that narrow lens. And so this has always been again, I'm using the word split again, in the Black community. It doesn't just have to do with Israel. It's that mindset. It's that ideology. What does that ideology look like? Well, I'm going to share with you another video. It is from the Glenn Laurie show. He has John McWhorter on his show. Again, he has him on quite a bit. And they talk about a lot of things. And lately they've been talking in their discussions, Israel or just Jews in general, the Jewish people will come up in conversation. And so I want to share with you this clip that was posted earlier by our CEO. And we'll keep going from there. So go ahead if you have that clip. Right.
Do you think, John, that the preponderance of the word narrative is negative, in that it feeds into the notion of a person or a group having my truth or our truth? This is Kevin Pete asking this question. Is this usage a legacy of postmodernism? It seems to me it's a retreat from the straightforward notion of truth.
Yep. I hate that word. The way it's
You don't like
evolved.
narrative?
Narrative, because it can be used to mean the way I feel, the way I choose to frame my story is an alternate version of what the rest of you think of as empirical truth, and you have to respect it because I'm brown. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. Even say 20 years ago, the word narrative in that sense was pejorative. There was Landmark uses it. You go to Landmark in order to figure out what to do with your life because you're feeling kind of lost. Landmark, at least 20 years ago, was using that, oh no, you're being held back by a narrative. No, folks, I did not do Landmark, but back then many people thought that I should. And so I went to a couple of foundational meetings. No, you're being held back by a narrative And what they meant by that was something that does not correspond with reality. But now, of course, I hate to say it, it's the CRT thing. The idea is that the racial narrative coming from an individual represents that person. You know, Hassan Minhaj, the South Asian comedian who's been caught telling stories about racist things that happened to him that didn't actually happen to him. And he defends himself by saying that he's using these things and these routines because he's representing people of his ethnicity and their experience. That's the narrative thing. And I'm not with it. I don't like it. What happened to me is a truth. No, what happened to you is based on facts that the rest of us should be able to assess. So no, I don't like this
Well,
new use of narrative.
I can sympathize with, agree with your objections to the misuse in that way, the way that you described of the concept, but I want to hold on to it anyway. I have this little thing that I do in some of my writing about race, where I talk about the bias narrative and the development narrative, and I'm contrasting two different accounts that people are inclined to give: folk wisdom, ways of representing history. The bias narrative being, you know, white supremacy has done us wrong. Structural racism needs to get its knee off of our black necks. Our ancestors were dispossessed, and you know, et cetera, and all the woes, prisons overflowing, broken families, low test scores, violent crime, blah blah. Everything is accounted for by this historical account, and so I use the word narrative to refer to this cluster of tales that people tell each other about what's going on in the world. And I contrast that with another narrative and a counter narrative, development narrative, which I mean, where the focus is on, okay, there may be
kind of Thomas Sowell, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you're going to develop your capacities to produce, and you're going to be more valued when you do. And that requires investment in skills, and it requires acquiring discipline, and it requires raising up our children. It requires developing the potential, the human potential. And, you know, they're not mutually exclusive, but these are different narratives. Okay, so I want to hold on to this idea that you can identify, contrast, and argue about the stories we tell our children about how the world came to be what it is. What about America? What about the narratives that we tell about the country? And of course, warts and all, the country. But is it a rapacious bandit society of plundering races, as the Ta-Nehisi Coates of the world would have it? Or is it a city on a hill, as the Reaganites would have it? Okay, those are contrasting narratives. Maybe neither one will suit you. But the concept, it seems to me, is useful. That's why.
All right. This brings us back to the Jews, as one says. I get you on that.
That's a narrative for you.
Yeah. And notice that Jewish people talk about the suffering, all these terrible things that were done to us and still are. But the idea is not, we suffered, and therefore you should understand why we are down. The idea is, we suffered and we triumphed, and they're proud of it. And that is part of why people are jealous of them. And if there is what I think of as genuine anti-Semitism, part of it is jealousy. Yeah, all right. A narrative can be used well. So, for example, how do you tell Black history? And the fashionable way of telling Black history is, here are the obstacles, and therefore you have to understand that's why more of us are poor than you might expect. That's really the story. Now, detractors, of course, nobody would say it that way, but that is the implication of the idea. To talk too much about Black victory is considered Pollyanna-ish and tacky and even disturbing among many, because once you talk too much about the successes, you're not talking about people banging their fists against the wall of structural racism and falling away, leaving a track of blood along the wall.
I want to point out this quote again for those who are on Instagram and Clubhouse who are getting glitchiness. I apologize, but for those who can't hear, I'm going to highlight this quote that Professor John McWhorter said. He said, "Notice that Jewish people talk about the suffering, all these terrible things that were done to us and still are, but the idea is not we suffered and therefore you should understand why we are down. The idea is, now listen to this, the idea is we suffered and we triumphed. and they're proud of it. And that is why people are jealous of them. And he said that if there is, he said, a genuine, true anti-Semitism, he said he believes that at the core of it is jealousy. He said that I think a Black history narrative that was about how we had triumphed would be more useful, especially today when so many of us have triumphed. So you see, they used Jewish people as an example, but the whole thing is that they're attacking the ideology at the root. They're saying that we have developed these entire doctrines. And someone commented about a module that teachers have been being taught in Washington State for the past 2 years. This has been taught for decades, right? It's been called different names, but this ideology that says we're oppressed, we're always going to be. It doesn't matter how many accomplishments we actually achieve. We're always it's the exception. It's not the rule. And it won't really matter because we'll always be kind of trapped in this prison called whiteness and white supremacy. And that will always be something that like brings us down, right? That is kind of like the basis for all these different ideologies, is that this is the whole framework is against us. The whole entire system is rigged against us. So there's really no hope. And so what Professor John McWhorter and Glenn Laurie were talking about was, see, we need to change that narrative, right? Yes, this is what we've been through. Yes, this is what we've suffered. Yes, we've been through centuries of slavery. We've been through another century of Jim Crow segregation. We still, as our CEO talks about when he's at forums and panels, we still built Black Wall Street. We still had the Harlem Renaissance. We still did so many different things. We still were able to achieve at such high levels in the face of such dire adversity that we are, and like the scriptures say, for many of us who are Christian, we are more than conquerors, right? That's a narrative that empowers. That's a narrative that says, hey, you know what? In your personal life, you may be going through some difficult stuff, but you have descended from people who moved mountains, right? And you can do that as well. Whenever I hear stories about that, it gives me pride. It gives me strength. It's a source of strength for me. And so, like Professor McWhorter said, changing that narrative would be a lot more useful to our community than let's look at all the woes and the woes. And then in conclusion, there are so many woes and we don't know what to do with them. And that's it. The end. Okay, everyone go home. Think about how oppressed you are. Try to think of new ways that you're oppressed. And let's come back next week and talk about those things and kind of get deeper into how we're oppressed, why we're oppressed, how it makes us feel. And now let's look at things that don't even really mean anything and try to make that into our oppression. Now let's look at issues that have nothing to do with us, like Israel, and turn that into our oppression. Now let's find people who seem to be oppressed like us, and we'll link arms with them, and we can be oppressed together, oppressed. Now what you've done, you've not only taught this destructive ideology, but you have made the minds of those young people so malleable that they're so easily manipulated. That all Yasser Arafat had to do was say, I'm a freedom fighter, we're brown, we're Arabs, Israel's a bunch of white European colonizers, and they're oppressing us. Stand with us. And those same people who've already adopted that ideology go, all right, we got your back. You show me someone who's embraced CRT. You show me someone who has embraced this whole equity, diversity, equity, inclusion, and I'll show you someone who is privy to stand against Israel. That's why we say that for those who are in the Israel advocacy space, it's never going to work out in our favor to embrace this ideology and just try to put in different variables in the equation. It's not going to work. You can't say, no, okay, CRT is valid, but let's just remove Jews because Jews aren't white. So Jews are over here, but yeah, white people are still evil. We can still do that. It's not going to work. It never works. It might seem to work sometimes, but when crap hits the fan, you saw it. So I said this last week. There are people I know who had close Jewish friends. I have close Palestinian friends, right? Who have close friends who embraced this ideology, who embraced the CRT thing and everything, who they saw on October the 8th in those rallies celebrating what happened on October 7th. I have Israeli friends who were like, I was so blindsided. I felt so betrayed. I have Israeli friends from 2021 during Israel's war with Hamas who had people that they thought they were their close friends. But when crap hit the fan, they turned on them, stopped talking to them, start talking about them, blocked them, removed themselves from them. Sometimes even publicly came after them. And they're like, how could they do this? Because that ideology lends itself to Jew hatred. There's no way that you can embrace that ideology and successfully divorce it from what will eventually become hatred, because it is an irrational, the ideology teaches an irrational hatred of white people. It's why, even societally, even culturally, it's why more people cringe if someone says I hate black people than if they say I hate white people. You notice that it's more acceptable, whether it's in comedy, whether it's whatever, for people to say disparaging things about white people. That is what's been embedded in our society. If you just replace the word white with the word black, most people, black, white, doesn't matter, would be like, "Ooh, you shouldn't be saying that. That's really bad." No, it's bad all the way around. But we've embraced this false pretense, and then are shocked when it very quickly gets turned on the Jews and gets turned on Israelis. That's because it has nothing to do with the color of one's skin. That's just the pretense. It is what it is. It's a really backwards way of thinking. So if we can change that entire way of thinking from I'm a victim, let me find other victims and we'll commiserate over our victimhood, to yes, we've been through a lot of stuff, but we've triumphed. That will also affect what we're seeing now. What we're seeing now with all these celebrations of October 7th, and now protesting of Israel as they're responding, and now this lack of concern for hostages. Ripping down, a lot of the people who've been ripping down the posters of the missing children were our college students, college professors. These aren't just random bums on the street. Some of these people are learned people, established people, people who are in the academic institution, who are using whatever knowledge they have up there to justify ripping down posters of missing children in Israel. I mean, what the heck? That's how deep and embedded this doctrine has become. And now talking about specifically in the civil rights movement, going back to SNCC, that's how that shift happened, right? You had someone who was willing to, quote unquote, investigate the 6-Day War. All they did was they went and talked to their Arab friends or Palestinian friends and people in the Nation of Islam, and came back and said, okay, I have the truth. The truth is that these white Jews came, stole this land, they took it from the brown Arabs. We have to link arms with these brown Arabs as we both march together for liberation. And for a lot of people who were already predisposed to that way of thinking, they were like, great, let's do it. What we are seeing now is just, 60 years in the future, you have the grandkids of these people. I mean, you have 2 generations down now of these people who have taken from this generation and have continued marching down the line with it. We can't embrace that. We can't embrace that. Let's see here. Now, it is 8:57, so we have just a few minutes left. I've been seeing some comments on here, and I haven't been looking at them yet, so I'm going to look at one of them here. Someone says, oh yes, I'll read this one in full. So again, this is from Washington State. Someone was sharing here on Facebook. Washington State gave this group leadership grant to train teachers in this module. Teachers have been trained in this for 2 straight years in Washington. And this is what the module says. Register for Module 2, Pulling the Weeds, Rooting Out Whiteness in the Classroom. $50 to $100. So that's the admission they're charging. Before transforming pedagogy, educators must take an inventory of their current practices and pull the weeds that are preventing them from implementing a culturally sustaining proxy. Washington Ethnic Studies now. So, rooting out whiteness, right? We think of these really fancy academic ways of just being really racist. I mean, can you imagine someone saying rooting out, and not even rooting out, like kind of like Dr. Brandy said, people are getting more comfortable in just saying the quiet part out loud, right? It used to be rooting out racism, right? Which still I go, that's impossible. You can't you can change policies, but you can't change what's in someone's heart. You'll always have racist people. You always have sexist people. You'll always have people who are hateful. Until the end of time, that's just human nature. You'll always have people who hate other people, who hate blindly other groups, people, all that stuff. So that's already impossible. But it's just blatant rooting out whiteness. Now, can you imagine? Can you imagine a module being taught called rooting out blackness, rooting out Asianness, rooting out Arabness? I mean, you see what I'm saying? Like, that should be for all of us weird. When we see those three words, we should look at that and go, that's very strange. We shouldn't be doing this. But we've gotten to a point where there's a large group of people who don't see a problem with it, or they might, but they're being told that it's not a problem, and so they just go along with it. And so that's part of it. And someone else has come now and said a big part of the problem is the massive anti-Israel campaign funded by Iran/Hamas/Hezbollah, directed toward a population of people, as you say, are predisposed to believe that Jews are oppressors. There's no structured voice for the truth. And this is what personally I've been saying for a while now, and this is just my personal capacity. Although we practice this too, is that the more that we're starting to see some of these things, the more that it really has to be incumbent upon us as parents, us as teachers, us as caregivers, as community leaders, to take steps towards divorcing ourselves from some of these institutions. You can fight and try and change, right, the institution from within, however you do it, without succumbing your children to the system at the same time. You can combat these things without also taking from. It's possible, right? It's more convenient. It can be at times. It's not easy, but hey, we can make a plan for anything else. We can make a plan for this, right? Yes, there is a very calculated propaganda campaign that's large and very, very well funded. And I mean, I joke about this, but I say some of those anti-Jewish conspiracy theories that people always put on the Jews about the Jews controlling everything, controlling the narrative, controlling the media, like, it is happening. It's just not the Jews that are doing it, right? We're seeing this, right? Billions of dollars. Some of the curriculum that we have in our schools are funded by Qatar. You know, we talk about Harvard University hired Saeb Erekat, who used to be the minister of, who was a propaganda minister for the PLO, as a counselor at Harvard for the social studies students. I mean, that's Nazi level infiltration and propaganda right there. And so this is something that has been about 60 years in the making. And what I described earlier with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee is sort of the genesis for this, right? And that's scary. That's scary. But it's also something that is now that we can see that that's what's happening, that's what's been happening. One, you know, it's you can speak the truth more clearly. But then two, it also allows you to make better decisions personally, knowing that these things exist and knowing that this thing has grown into a behemoth, right? It's grown to this big, large, kind of like machine that really is not stopping anytime soon. All right, so we've covered a few things. Sometimes an hour seems long. Sometimes it seems very short. It seems very short this time. And again, for those who have been who've been sticking with us this whole hour, I thank you. We apologize for the technical difficulties. I think the actual issue is my computer here. My speaker is just on my computer is staticky and it's glitching, and I'm not sure why. So everyone who's streaming, you were able to see the videos. People who are streaming on Instagram and Clubhouse, you weren't able to really hear, and I apologize for that. But again, you'll be able to see it once this session ends. It'll be up. You'll be able to see it on Instagram. You'll be able to see clips of it on YouTube, and share it. Please share. That's something I want to also, as I shift here a little bit, is to remind you guys to please. One other way that you can really support us is by sharing our content. Share it. Don't just post about it to your friends, your neighbors. Email it to people. Something you think that they need to hear, they need to see. That's something that we very much appreciate and helps us continue to grow. And also, you can follow us on all the platforms, IBSI Now on every platform. And once again, to help us continue to grow, you can become a legacy builder, which is something you can do monthly. Last week, I challenged everyone to give $18 a month, just to start that residual or regular giving each month to have your account go off $18 at least. That challenge still stands. If you are able to scan the QR code that you see in front of you, or if you are watching me on other platforms, you can go to ibsi.org, click donate, and you can become a legacy builder. Just at least $18 a month to help us. We have a lot of events coming up, and a lot of this kind of information that we want to be sharing and more, and to be able to have Q&A sessions, and to also share live music that pertains to what we're doing and all those different things. And in order to be able to do that at the level that we need to do it at, we need money. And that's just kind of the reality of life, And so please, if you have the ability to, we would very much appreciate that. And yes, again, lastly, just want to remind you all, if you're in Los Angeles, if you're in Southern California, we will be there. We meaning I will be there. Our CEO will be there. Our COO will be there, and also our Speakers Bureau chief will be there. Happens to be there at the same time. She'll be there for Club Z. Whole family will be there, and we'll be doing a lot of great things for Zion's sake. Please come out and see us. Go to our website, join our mailing list for more updates on that. And yes, someone just reminded us on the comments, 18. Yes, 18 is equivalent to high. It's a number of life. That is why I chose that number. But you can definitely give more. You can do double high. You can give 36. You can do a completely different number. We really appreciate it in any case. So again, thank you so much. You all appreciate it. And I'm hope to see you next week. Same time, same place, 8 p.m. Eastern time. We will fix all those difficulties, the technical difficulties by next week. And we look forward to seeing you. Thank you so much, you all. You all have a wonderful rest of your week.